Welcome. In this lecture, we're going to look at chapter 23 and talk about the Romantic Opera of Germany. More specifically, we're going to look at the music of Richard Wagner. Nordic fantasy literature. So in the mid-19th century, we see this great fascination with the Middle Ages and this kind of romanticization of the things that were happening in the Middle Ages. Okay, so we look at composers and artists are looking back to medieval sagas, epic poems, and these were things like dark tales of dark castles, fair maidens, heroic princesses maybe saving the damsel in distress, fire-breathing dragons, and so forth. And we have during this period in the 19th century, we have this kind of rediscovery of a lot of these tales and poems from the Middle Ages. One of the biggest ones is the epic poem Beowulf. Many of you probably read this in high school and so forth. And there's another poem that gets published in 1820. It's a German poem called Song of the Nibelungen. And this poem, again, it's kind of this fantastical tale of dark castles and the fair maidens and so forth. And the Song of the Nibelungen is the basis that Richard Wagner is going to take his four operas called the Ring Cycle and create this these series of operas around this poem. Richard Wagner. Now, Wagner was a German composer and conductor. Okay, probably one of the most important German conductors and composers in the Romantic era. His dates are 1813 to 1883. So he was a poet, philosopher, politician. He was definitely he had his hand in a lot of things. He was a visionary. He mainly was an operatic composer, okay? And a lot of his operas were kind of cutting edge for their time period, okay? And we'll see here, he's a controversial composer. Some of his music was inspired extreme reactions. A lot of his operas really pushed the boundaries and pushed the limits, okay? They exerted a numerous influence and so forth, okay? Some of his operas are really long. Some of his operas have a lot of instruments required to have these operas, okay? His political views were definitely controversial as well, and also he was, during his lifetime, he was very anti-Semitic as well. He was largely self-taught as a musician, okay? And he does write a lot of famous operas that we do have today. The first one we'll see down there is Der Fliegende Holländer. That's the Flying Dutchman, Tannhäuser, and Lohengrin. There are three famous operas, and those operas are still being performed today. Okay, they're very important. All these operas are German operas, and they're the language that they're written in is German, and they're fairly long and complex. Probably his most important operas are going to be the four operas called the Ring Cycle, which we're going to talk about. But again, Wagner, he's a mainly operatic composer, and he's definitely very influential in the Romantic period. As you see, he was a politician. He was a pot stirrer as well. He actually tried to lead a coup in Germany in 1948, and then he failed and had to flee. So he spent a lot of his time in Switzerland. Later on, though, after things died down, he actually goes back to Germany and to his town, a town called Bayreuth, and builds an opera house in Bayreuth, and this whole big opera house is like to celebrate his music and the music of this series of operas called the Ring Cycle. Now, when we talk about Wagner and his operas, there's three things we want to know, okay, or be aware of. The first is, Wagner, he didn't like the term opera, okay? He preferred to call his works musical dramas, okay? And there's a term called Gesamtkunstwerk, and that term is a term that he wanted to refer to his dramas as, and it's the idea of total artwork. Okay, he was looking for an endless melody or endless flow of music from beginning to end. Okay, now these operas are different than the operas of the Italian operas of Verdi, okay, or the operas of Bizet for French opera, okay. You don't really see the recitative, maybe a big choir and so forth, okay. You're going to have lyrical moments and maybe moments of pause, but it's going to have music constantly throughout, okay. There's a lot of this opera because it does avoid melodic repetition or symmetry, okay. It's going to be a lot of highs and a lot of lows, okay. And with that, since he doesn't have these specific arias and recitatives like the Italian counterpart, we're going to have a new way of organizing these dramas, which I'll talk about in a minute. So Wagner, when he's writing these new style operas called Gesamtkunstwerk, he's taking out these tuneful arias and these vocal ensembles. Okay. Another thing that Wagner is doing is he's really putting an importance on the instrumental music of the orchestra. Okay. He's going to use the orchestra for much more color, much more emphasis for emotion. And in addition, the orchestra is going to play a very, very important role with the next term that we want to know called leitmotifs. Okay. Now, a leitmotif is a small, distinct motive or melodic fragment that's going to have an idea associated with it. Okay. So when maybe there's a character in the Ring called Wotan. When Wotan walks on stage, he's going to have his own motive play to let the listeners know that, all right, well, Wotan is walking on stage, okay? So it's a brief, distinctive unit of music, and it will represent a character or idea or an object, okay? So a leitmotif doesn't have to be a person. It can be an object. And there's several different examples in the Ring cycle. If I have a magic sword, well, my magic sword's going to have a specific motive. Or if I have this magic fire, there's a great motive called the eternal flames. That type of thing is going to be a motive. Okay. It can suggest characters' subconscious thoughts. And keep in mind that if the character is going through the plot, and if the character's developing or changing, well, these motives that follow the character, they're going to change with the character since the character's changing. Maybe if you have one character on stage who's becoming more sinister and evil, maybe the motive is going to become more darker. Maybe it's going to go lower in the bass, or maybe it's going to be more twisty or whiny. Okay, so these leitmotifs will change to help reflect that character development. Okay, so there's two terms we want to know. Gesamtkunstwerk, okay, which is this idea of total artwork, and then leitmotifs. Now, I'm going to continue talking about leitmotifs real quickly, again, because this is a radical idea in the 19th century. This was completely unheard of, which makes Wagner's music kind of controversial. I mean, they saw these operas during their time, and they're used to like the Verdi style operas and the Mozart kind of style operas, where we have these arias and we have some recitative, and then we have a big chorus and so forth. And then when we get this is a completely new way of organizing music. So it definitely was radical, and people during the time, it took them a while to kind of digest this. Okay. Now, the second thing I want you folks to be aware of is these leitmotifs are very important in opera, but there's another spot that we get exposed to leitmotifs on a daily basis. And that's going to be in watching music of films, okay? And most big Hollywood films will use this type of concept of a leitmotif. The best examples that you know that most everyone that comes in our college right now, they've seen Star Wars. Okay, great series of movies. They got the TV shows and so forth. But when the three first Star Wars movies came out, the Star Wars trilogy, the music's by a composer by the name of John Williams. He's using this idea of a leitmotif. Luke Skywalker's going to have a motive. The Force will have this motive. In The Empire Strikes Back, you're going to have like this Imperial March. And when the characters come on stage and the music plays underneath, we know, boom, that's the bad guy. Or, oh, something's going to happen here because we see the Force motive or so forth. Another example would be in Jaws. Great movie from the 70s by John Williams, did the music again. We have this oscillating motive in the bass. Dun, 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 dun. And it's a simple, small motive. But with those two notes going back and forth, it tells the listener, we know something bad's going to happen. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know what specifically is going to happen. But we know by those two notes that something happy. It's not going to be happy. It's not going to be pleasant. And that all those two notes do, it just tells the listener. It sets their expectation. It sets their emotion and mood. So again, these motives, they're used in music, films, TV shows. Okay, their origins come from Wagner. Okay, and so we want to know the two things: Gesamtkunstwerk work and leitmotif. Now, when we talk about the Ring Cycle, it's a series of 4 operas by Richard Wagner. Now, each of these operas, mind you, are very, very long. They're about, their Valkyrie is like 5 hours long or 4.5 hours long. So the 4 operas are called, the first one's called Das Rheingold, okay? The second one is Die Walküre. Third one is called Siegfried. And then the fourth one is called Götterdämmerung, which means the Twilight of the Gods. And they, mind you, these were written, it took them good 20 years, give or take, to write these operas. It was a long time. And they're still performed today. Sometimes they get performed in a week span. They do like over 4 nights. So they're important because of a couple of things. They're going to obviously they're a kind of an analogy or allegory of 19th century Germanic society. But the operas themselves, they explore greed, heroism, race, and power. Okay. And I talked about, Wagner having this special opera house built in Bayreuth. Well, the opera house still exists today, and every year they perform the Ring Cycle in the summertime, and it's a big to do for people to get tickets to go see this. The first Bayreuth Festival was in 1876, playing this entire Ring Cycle. Now, keep in mind, to put one of these operas on, it has tremendous performing forces. It's a huge orchestra, okay? You also have the sets, which are usually ornate, and the singers, the operatic singers, will be singing on stage for about 4 to 5 hours. And so it's really, really demanding on the performers as well. So there's a lot going on with these operas. And to do them one after the other, it's intense. And I'll say this, even my own personal reflection for seeing these operas, because I've seen them at the Met and whatnot. It does take a lot of concentration to sit there and to listen to one of these operas. Wagner asks a lot on the listener. So we're going to look at a few bits from Die Walküre. So the second opera of the series is an opera called Die Walküre. Okay, it was written in 1856, first performed in 1870. So we're getting toward the latter half of the 19th century. Okay, the characters, we have these Valkyrie. Okay, now the Valkyrie are these high-flying, hard-riding women warriors. Okay, and they're riding on these kind of winged Pegasus. and their father is Wotan. Wotan's the head; he's the chief god. Okay, and the Valkyries, what they do is they're mythical creatures. They fly down, and they're immortal as well. So they fly down after a battle, and their job is to take the deceased warriors, the warriors who died in battle, and bring them to Valhalla, which is their version of heaven. So, when the music pushes continually forward for minutes, these warrior maidens carry the collapsed corpses of their fallen heroes to Valhalla and the house of the gods. So that's going to be this main scene that we're going to look at with the Valkyrie. I want to make sure you folks go on Canvas and actually watch the excerpt that I have, because it's going to say a lot when you watch the characters interact on screen. But before we get there, we'll listen to the music of the Valkyrie, okay? And in this scene, the Ride of the Valkyries, we're going to have several leitmotifs in action, okay? The first motif is the Valkyrie motive, okay? And this is going to be a motive that I guarantee you most all of you have heard before, because it's in mass media. It's kind of everywhere, okay? And it has this kind of, well, let me play it for you. So again, it's a wonderful piece. It really is. But it's got this huge orchestra. You got the brass doing the bum 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 bum. So the brass is playing this melody, and you have these strings doing these arpeggios going up and down. You got the bass having this this kind of this ostinato underneath, and then you have the woodwinds in the background doing all these trills, kind of like we're flying. And keep them on this music. It's really, really colorful. It's really, really effective. And the music really, really helps transport you into the drama. I mean, it really does. And that's one of the things that's really effective about these leitmotifs. The second motif is the Valkyrie's vocal motive, okay? And you'll see, ho ya ho. When they come on stage, they'll be singing ho ya ho, ho ya ho, which are these kind of like nonsense syllables, but it's kind of like their call to arms, or they're kind of like their battle cry. Let's go listen. So it's a short clip, but but when you watch the video, you'll hear the Valkyries sing this kind of battle cry as they come in, swoop in, and they start taking the corpses back to Valhalla. So that's going to be the Ride of the Valkyries. That's what the piece is about. It's got the two leitmotifs, the Ride of the Valkyrie motif, and then their vocal motif. Now, we're going to look at the scene called Wotan's Farewell. And there's two characters in the scene. Wotan, who's the chief of the gods, and then Brunhilde, who's his daughter and the leader of the Valkyries. And what basically, it's kind of Wotan saying goodbye to his daughter. He's actually putting her in this internal sleep because she broke some rules, or broke a few laws that he had set. And so at the end of this final scene, he's putting in this magic slumber. Okay, so we're gonna have three motives that they're gonna come out in the scene. The first is the slumber scene, and it's a beautiful motive. It's like this really kind of long and gorgeous kind of melody. Okay. And as Wotan's doing this, he's feeling bad that she's asleep on this mountain by herself and not protected. So he basically instills what we call this magic fire and puts this fire around her as protection. And so there's a magic fire motif that comes out, and it comes out in the higher registers of the strings. And then finally, as the scene comes to an end, we hear Siegfried's motif, okay? And Siegfried's a character, he hasn't appeared in on stage. Siegfried's going to come later on, and he's gonna come across this magic fire in see Brunhilde, and he's gonna go, he falls in love with her, and he's gonna wake her up and get her out of this eternal slumber. So let's go listen to these motives. The first one's the slumber motive. Now, next is going to be the magic fire. And it's going to be, you're going to hear Wotan singing, but it's going to be here these string gestures in the higher registers. Let's listen. And now, Siegfried is a hero motive, okay? And this motive is done to tell us, the listener, hey, the hero's going to come and, wake her up down the road. Let's listen. So this concludes chapter 21, the music of Richard Wagner and the Ring Cycle.